Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I am delighted to be joined by Paul McQuade. Welcome to the studio, Paul. How are you?
I'm good, Paul, thank you.
It's great to see you, as always. You're a busy man, but we're here to speak about the one and only, the late, the great Johnny Doyle. You've written a book. Now, what I would like to ask you first and foremost are your memories of Johnny Doyle, because when I started going to watch Celtic, he had gone. I mean, my first game was in 87, so I rely on books and the Celtic Wiki and the old videotapes to try and give me a wee bit more information about this, what I think has been referred to as a cult icon. What's your memories of Johnny?
Well, I think I only ever saw him play once, which was my first visit to Celtic Park. It was a friendly against the Uruguayan team 77, so I was only 6 at the time. Very faint, you know. One of my big cousins took me and my brother, my two cousins. We were up the back of the Celtic end, beyond that. But going back, there's a great photo of Johnny riding a tackle, and the Uruguayans were in a yellow and black striped jersey, you know. So I was there, so I've obviously seen him play. My first proper Celtic Park visit was for my 11th birthday. That was the present, and we were at Aberdeen, top of the table clash. But the sad thing was, Johnny died on my 11th birthday. So that was the day we had a minute's silence at Celtic Park for Johnny. It took, I think, 2 or 3 weeks after his death for us to get a home game, you know. So that was that. So there was always just that wee connection between myself and Johnny because of the unfortunate timing of his death. But like yourself, other than that, it was just stories. So even at that time, 80-81, that was my first proper home game. My first European game was Notts Forest. My pal Alex had already been at the Real Madrid game, the Juventus game, and at primary school he was telling us and our pals all about the Real Madrid game. And even now, you know, you still get a lot of Celtic fans say that night, that atmosphere was unbelievable. So you're 10, 11, 12 years old, your pals telling you this, you know. Then you meet, as you go older, you meet other Celtic fans, they start talking about the Real Madrid game and their stories and memories of this guy, this winger who was a live wire. But a lot of them met him, a lot of them knew him, a lot of them had stories about this guy as well. And then, of course, the stuff that everybody knows about him, the sending offs, the incident with the referee down at Ayr, the funny stuff as well. So you're thinking, he's quite unusual, and he definitely is a cult figure as far as Celtic fans are concerned.
This cult icon, that status, it's something I've thought long and hard about. And you ask yourself, what makes a cult icon? What do you think makes a cult icon?
I think it's somebody who leaves a mark on fans. You know, that's probably the most telling thing about them. And they're not Henrik Larsson. They're not an absolute superstar. You know, they haven't won necessarily loads of medals, loads of trophies. But they're somebody who the fans remember through some bad times as well. You know, so it's somebody who's won a place in the heart of the fans for their commitment, for their connection as well. And I think Johnny Doyle definitely meets that. I
think that's important, that word connection, because they can either connect through their talent, or they can connect through sometimes their personality, or a bit of both.
Yeah.
And you think of the cult icons down the years, and Johnny Doyle is definitely in that category. Also in that category, Paul, I've got to say, is the biography of Johnny Doyle, because I think that in my mind there's always been a clutch of Celtic books that have never been written, and you just kind of hope someone will write them someday. I heard rumours about this book years ago. Could you tell me about the birth of this, the idea, how that developed and how it came to be yourself that wrote it?
Well, Joanna, Johnny's daughter, tells the story of how on the 30th anniversary, Celtic Grave Society had a celebration, a commemoration at his gravesite, and that day she recalls was the first time somebody asking, is there a book? And why is there not a book, you know? And that certainly got her mind going for a while, and I think she'd put out a few feelers, and then of course it goes quiet and what have you as well. She spoke to Brendan Sweeney, who's in the Celtic Grave Society, so I've known Brendan for a few years, and Brendan had done his first early years book, but he'd said to her, look, he recommended me, you know, he said, I think this is more up Paul Street than my street, you know, but we together had done a booklet about Johnny about 15 years ago to raise funds for a banner for him. And I'd met Joanna there. In actual fact, we did a fundraising race night. Josh McCluskey turned up, uninvited, just turned up because it was for Johnny. And then as the night progressed, we realised some of the people in the back of the room were his family, his sister, his daughter, his son, were all there, you know. And so that's how we got to know them. And because of that, we got access to some of their scrapbooks to help make this booklet. So that worked out really well. But the booklet really just scratched the surface, you know. So when Jana approached me, I said, I think there's, well, the other thing that had actually happened was in the last 10 years or so, there's a lot more stories come out about Johnny because Celtic players doing podcasts, more books, and there was a lot more than was there 15 years ago. So I said, I definitely think there's a book. There's enough to make a book, but also there were more of an archive that the family had as well. So not just scrapbooks, but articles, interviews, newspaper clippings, and that proved really helpful as well. So that was another thing to mine. Brendan also gave me access to all of his Celtic views for the 5-6 years Johnny was at the club as well. Really helpful, you know. So that helped piece all that together. And it took just over 2 years from start to finish. But I really enjoyed it because there's just so many good stories along the way, you know. It was really good fun.
You know, when you're in that kind of zone, Paul, of focusing entirely on one subject from the club's history or one player from the club's history, you get to feel like you know them, don't you?
Definitely, yeah, definitely a little bit. And with Johnny as well, that's the impression I think that a lot of people have of them. They might only have met him once or twice, but they've never forgotten it. You know, he definitely had that impression on people. And one of the things I found really interesting about the book was the family story. So the early life in View Park, but his time at Ayr United was absolutely fascinating because that period of Scottish football when Ali McLeod got this team together, old heads, young heads like Johnny, and unbelievable success, the most successful period in Ayr's history, and they pulled off some incredible results and would regularly feature in the top 6 in Scottish football. And that was how Johnny and a couple of others made it into the Scotland under-23s. Then Johnny gets the call-up. First Ayr United player in almost half a century to play for Scotland, and there hasn't been one since. Incredible, you know. So I was really fascinated by all of that too.
The thing is, obviously, he played for many years at Ayr United before coming to Celtic, but he was a lifelong Celtic fan. I mean, some of the stories I've been told about him turning up, you know, with the Celtic scarf on for training. And also Danny McGrain tells me the story that he wore the biggest crucifix you could imagine around his neck as well, and I've seen pictures of him with that on show outside the Celtic jersey. So during his period at Ayr United, from all the research you've done and the people you've spoken to, Paul, did he think that it was all going to eventually lead to that magical moment where he signs for the Hoops? Did he believe that?
I think he always had the hope that it would, but he'd already had a disappointment because in some of the interviews he says that Celtic, there had been a strong suggestion Celtic were interested in him when he was still playing boys' gold football, and he was disappointed that nothing came of it. So he spoke about that in a couple of interviews, and he was quite almost bitter about the lost opportunity. So fast forward a couple of years, he's then getting, you know, suggestions of international contention and other teams coming in for him, mostly English teams sending up scouts, having him watched, but the Celtic thing was always rumbling under the surface, and basically any chance he got in an interview he would make it quite clear that he was a Celtic fan. So it was a real come and get me thing. But then it wasn't happening. Ayr United realised we've got a prize asset here, so although they were only paying him a matter of £30-40 a week tops, they were demanding £85,000-100,000 for him, you know. And it looked as though Celtic had decided enough, so they'd bid initially. Ali McLeod this time was at Aberdeen and wanted him, and they were prepared to bid 85,000 as well. And it looked as though one weekend it was all going wrong, and Sunday night it looked as though maybe Aberdeen, and then it looked as though it was collapsing. He was in dispute with Ayr, so it was agreed he had to get out, you know. And then finally, I think about half 10 at night, Celtic bid 95, and Ayr board accepted that. So that meant he then had to get to the airport the next morning because Celtic were travelling away to Europe, and there was a deadline. So he was up all night. He was up all night listening to his heavy rock music. He couldn't get to sleep. First thing he did when it got light, he phoned Jerry McNee. He'd promised Jerry McNee he'd get the story, because Jerry McNee had done a lot for him to get his story out there that he wanted to go to Celtic. Did that, and then him and his wife went to the airport and signed for Sean Fallon at the airport.
Isn't it incredible how times have changed in respect of agents and getting that word out? And I've heard of players who would utilise their favourite reporter or someone that they had built up a relationship with in the press, Paul, and get that word out, and then the club reads that and then acts on it. It's incredible to think that that's the way it was done back then. Yeah,
and it's interesting because Ali MacLeod also used the press in that way. Ali MacLeod would go to the press club in Glasgow every Friday afternoon for a drink, and that was him making connections. He was well known for the journalists coming in post-match down at Somerset Park. He'd open up the drinks cabinet, they'd all get torn in, and he's always dropping hints, he's always pushing his players for international places. He's always suggesting that maybe someone would be tempted by a move elsewhere, bring money into air, move people on, and the machinations of this were incredible. And then you see Johnny working in harmony with Jerry McNee to the same effect as well, you know. And Jerry McNee did a particularly good job because it wasn't just a single interview, it went on over a course of months. So Johnny's obviously slipping him information about how unhappy he is at the Ayr board stance. This all followed the red card against Andy Lynch at Celtic Park, and ultimately led to this situation developing. So Johnny, like some of the players at the time, particularly good at manipulating the media when he needed to. But interestingly, about a year and a half before this, Schalke, the German club, were interested in signing Johnny, and Andy Gray up at Dundee United sent scouts over. And I found this out through Johnny Graham, the Ayr United captain, who became a good friend of Johnny Doyle. Johnny Graham produced a book before he died a few years ago, just published it himself. There's some great stories in it, including the one where they spend a night in a Glasgow hotel trying to find out whether the guys from Germany are real agents or not. They're worried that they're going to get into trouble because Ayr United don't know anything about it. The first person they see walk through the lobby is Ernie Walker from the SFA. And it's hideous, you know. Then finally they go up to a hotel room and they're speaking to a German individual who maintains he's from Schalke, but they just think there's something quite dodgy. So they say that we're ending it here, you'll need to speak to Ayr. And it turns out they then send the club president and the scout along to the game on the Saturday to watch him, and it's out in the open. But unfortunately, doesn't play well, pressure gets to him against Dundee, and they don't make a bid, and they don't go for Andy Gray either. But supposedly that would have set them up for life, the money that was on offer. So again, no agents at that time, have to do it all himself. But fortunately for him, fortunately for Celtic, it played out differently.
You spoke about the Andy Lynch incident. I'm going to come back to that because that incident resulted in Andy Lynch going into Johnny's black book, and we'll talk about the black book as well. But see, when we're looking at Celtic books, I don't know, you know, where else there is a club that has such a canon of literature than Celtic Football Club. It's quite incredible when you start looking at the amount of books written about this club, the history of the football club, the individual players, the fans, everything's been covered, Paul. But as I say, there was always that wee gap that I felt. Johnny Doyle, maybe John Clark, maybe Henrik, Paul McStay. There's a few players that really, you know, had to be written about. So it's great that you did. But what I also like is the fact that you've done it yourself. So that takes us on to the subject of the Shamrock. Talk to us about the Shamrock. Whether we chat about this, because, you know, again, as well as literature in book form, we've been famous for fanzines. And this is a fanzine of sorts, but with a difference. So tell us about the Shamrock and how that's developed as well.
My main interest is the history of Celtic and Scottish football more generally, and so I thought there's a bit of a gap there. I've been able to write long pieces, particularly about some of the early characters, the politics, you know, the Irish identity of the club. How did that come about? You know, it seems straightforward, but there's a lot more to it. There's other Irish clubs before Celtic, not just Hibs, many more, you know. So all of that stuff really fascinated me. And I thought, you know, if I start my own fanzine, then at least there's a vehicle for this, you know. And that's it, you know. I wanted to write about Gil Hearn, I wanted to write about Mohammed Salim. You know, I'd done a bit of research on these guys. I thought there's loads more as well, you know. The one that just came to fruition about a year ago was when Jimmy Johnson died. My father told me again that he'd remembered a story from when he was young of Jimmy playing in a team of masked men.
Yes.
Yeah, so the rumour of the masked men had been going for years, you know. And so I started looking into that about 8 or 9 years ago, did a bit of research, actually was on holiday in Donegal, met one of the organisers of the tournament in Moville, got some information that confirmed it. He confirmed Jimmy Johnson was definitely there. And then I managed to track down, by pure luck, a guy who'd played for the Caerphilly Emeralds the year before but didn't play with Jinky, or sorry, the year after, but he knew the Jinky. So like, okay. So I took it so far, but I never published it. And then a journalist wrote a piece in the Herald about it, because there'd been more stuff had come out from one of the Derry newspapers, you know. It's like, that's filling in a few of the gaps. And then went back to my notes and started to chase down a couple. There was a connection with Croy, footballers from the Croy area, and I had a couple of names, you know, and I thought, And now with the internet, searched this name, and the name turned up in a Celtic book, and it was a Celtic supporter, you know, who'd interviewed guys in Croy. So I got in touch with the author, and he said, yeah, here's a phone number, you know, a guy that passed it on. So I phoned this guy up, and he was in his early 80s, and he was a Caerphilly Emerald. He put it all together for me. He played every year for the Emeralds. Wow. And Jinky was there that first year. 1 year, Jinky played, he was only about 17, and he had fantastic memories. So I went to see him about a year and a half ago, and one really sunny afternoon, got it all written down. Brilliant. And unfortunately he died within about 10-12 months. But I was able at least to get the story completed, you know. So that's it. You know, I love these things. I think you're right, we're absolutely blessed as a club with the history that we do have, and yet some of the stories are known but they're not fully known. So that's the idea, you know. I want to keep going, finding out more, going back, delving in earlier. And you're right, there's gaps, you know, there's gaps. John Clark's a great shout. Paul McQuade doesn't have a book, which is incredible. You know, he's my favourite Celtic player that I've seen. Henrik Larsson's got a book. It's one of the most disappointing things in my life, the Henrik Larsson book, because one of the chapters starts off with, woke up in the morning, ate a grapefruit, went to training. Come on. It was just, you know, as a Daily Record journalist wrote it with him, you know, just thinking, okay, I'm sure there's more to that story, you know, but never mind. So I think that's where fan media really comes in, because there's that desire to find out more, get to the truth, make it a bit more interesting as well, you know. So fingers crossed there'll be more to come.
Without a doubt. And it gave you also a vehicle, Paul, to publish the books. So you've moved into publishing books, which again gives you more control when it comes to that stage of getting the book over the line, because often with publishers that can be quite difficult. Yeah,
and I went into that blind. The inspiration for that was, like I said, my interest is the history, the early history. But Brendan Rodgers' first season, that summer I kept thinking, we're probably never going to have a season like that again. You know, Invincibles, Roderick's winning goal in the cup final, but not just that, the standing section, the songs that were created, it was the perfect season. And I thought, I've got to get this written down from my perspective at least. It doesn't matter if anyone else is interested in it, you know. So that was the first book I did. But then the second book was more what I'm really into, which is the history, the Coronation Cup final. That was my dad's first Celtic game. But I thought the whole story of the competition is fascinating. And the fact that Celtic, who a lot of people didn't think should have been in it because we were so poor at the time, but the coming together, that group of Celtic players with Jock Stein just coming in, and then Sean Fallon helping him become captain, it just worked perfectly, you know. So that was the second book, and Johnny Doyle's a kind of leap forward in time, more into the modern era. I don't imagine I'll do much that close to the current day again, you know. Hopefully next thing will be probably a project on Irish clubs in Scotland. That's a real kind of brilliant, passionate area for me at the moment, you know. What was it like before Celtic, and then the impact of Celtic on the Irish teams as well.
Very interesting, Paul. Now, Johnny Doyle, cult hero, died in the Will Celtic fan. When he signs for Celtic, the Celtic fans take to him, not just because of the fact he's one of us, as you would say, but he's a very talented footballer. It saddens me now that we don't have as many of those types of players in modern football. I think Celtic are quite unique in that we always do have one or two.
Yep.
It all comes down to, I feel, and this wasn't the case with Johnny, the youth development. So you're bringing them through. A lot of them are Celtic supporters from the terraces to the pitch. But it's dying out. How sad does that make you feel?
It's unfortunate, it's partly the way that football has gone as well, because if you're particularly good at football at a young age, you'll end up in the academy system, presumably, and that means you won't be able to watch necessarily games at the weekend. There's clashes. So even for someone like Kieran Tierney, I think you've got to be lucky. Your family's got to be right into the club, you know what I mean? So going to the games regularly, take you along, but otherwise there's going to be that clash. So it's going to be hard, I think, for the younger players to make the connection, and also once they're in the academy way of things, I think it moulds people in different ways. They've got to be very careful about their interactions with the public and what have you. So that's why Kieran Tierney was so unusual to go to away games. I saw him at Motherwell, Hamilton the same season when he was injured. He was in amongst the fans. Really unusual to see that, and you do think you probably won't get to see it again, but it's all about the family, it's all about the personal connection with the club, and I think because it's Celtic, that'll never be lost. But what you won't get is if a Celtic player wanted to wear a scarf to the game, I think that would be discouraged, Some of the things that Johnny did would definitely be discouraged. And I know, like, Jock Stein wasn't happy. He was like, what are you doing? What are you turning up wearing a scarf, going to away games and stuff, And I think there was a generational thing there as well, probably when we never did that. Why are you doing it? And he just did it because he thought it was, he wanted to do it. He supported the club before he got there, so this was just a natural continuation. But yeah, I don't think we'll see much of the like of that again.
When he signs record fee, and at that time Celtic have been blessed with wingers. I mean, it's something historically, and I know you love your history, it could be quite daunting. There's certain numbers at Celtic that it would be daunting to put them on your back. Back then it was on the shorts, of course. Yeah. So when you're a winger, I remember David Provan once saying that he owed a lot to Johnny Doyle, because it's not as though he was trying to come in and be the next Jimmy Johnson, because there had been a player in there before him. Do you think he relished that though, Paul?
I think he did. His time at Celtic was very challenging, and that's the great thing I found out about Johnny, was how he dealt with those challenges. So there's the burden of Jinky, so there's the personal connection with Jinky. The families know each other, they grew up together, both mine and families as well, went to the same school. So I think Johnny, like a lot of people view Jinky personally anyway, One thing I did find out, which I didn't know, the book was actually written, and Jason, Johnny's son, said to me, I've got other scrapbooks here in the house, and I'm thinking, I think I've seen them all, and the book was written, so I want to get it out. This is like February, and I thought, I can't take the chance, I better look to see. And sure enough, there was other stuff in there that I hadn't come across, including this amazing story of, so it was well known that when Johnny got to the Boys Guild, he had to be persuaded, because he was already travelling, seeing Celtic home and away. He'd paid his supporters club membership for the year, and the Boys Guild claimed, our main guy's injured, a guy called Jizer Breen, we need a new striker coming. And he was like, no, but they're saying that we're giving you an opportunity, this could lead to Celtic. No, he said, I've already paid my money, and he was seen the best Celtic team in history. This is like 67, 68, 69. So we had to go back a few times to persuade him, and he did, and it was successful and it was going well, but he was missing Celtic and he was losing interest. But Jimmy Johnson turned up for a couple of Boys Guild training sessions. Jinky took him aside, this I found in an interview, took him aside and said to him, look, I think you could make it. And he was showing him some of his moves. He was showing him how to, things to do with defenders to get away and what have you. And I think this is incredible that I'd never seen this before. So I managed to get that in. So there's the Jinky. He never. Then he joins a year after Jinky leaves, but they played in the testimonial together against Man United, Jinky and Bobby's testimonial. So he loved that. But that was it, So there's the shadow of Jinky, which is obviously massive for any Celtic player. And the expectations that comes with being the number 7 player as well, And that was one of the things I had to get some clarity from St Anthony, the author of the 4-2 book, Stephen, because it looked to me as though his first full season at Celtic was a big success. We did the double, came back from a bad season the season before. But actually, he himself was saying in interviews, and then later on playing for Celtic, book interviews 3 years on, my first season was a disaster, it was a washout. And I'm going, you won 2 medals, I don't understand it. But what Stephen was explaining was, he did well. He did well, but he wasn't quite meeting the expectations of this one of Scotland's best wingers at the time, coming in and hitting it every week after week after week. Because again, the heightened expectations of Celtic were so much more than Ayr, you know. And he appreciated that, because one of the things that he did successfully was, everybody knows his disciplinary record at Ayr left a lot to be desired. And again, in interviews, he's explaining, yeah, I'm reacting too much, and Jockstein's telling me I've got to stop this, otherwise that's it, you're out the team. And he said I could get back into the team at Ayr because there wasn't anybody else who could keep me out, you know. But here it's different. So here, and I think he managed that, because he only got 2 red cards in his 6 years at Celtic. One of them was rescinded, the referee went with the ball in the face, and the other one was the 4-2 game. That was entirely justified. So he managed to screw the head there. But just after he does that and he's settling in again, the disastrous 77-78 season, and then Billy McNeill comes in, and Billy McNeill signs Davy Provan, the new right winger, and that's Johnny's position. And it's like, oof. And he's out the team, he's in the reserves 1 month, 2 months, and he realises, I need to really persuade Billy McNeill that I can still bring value to this team, you know. And he does that by making it clear he can play anywhere in the front line. So Billy McNeill comes back, game before, important Rangers game, I think it's out at Arbroath, he plays Doyle on the left, Provan on the right. They go and they play that against Rangers, they get a good draw, which they weren't really expecting. That's it, he's back in the team, he's proven that he's versatile. And his sister Anne-Marie told me that when he was about 6, 7, 8, he was always a football fanatic. His dad was a huge Celtic fan. His dad was in a wheelchair at this point. But his dad used to say to him, you'll never play for Celtic, you're too right-footed. You need to learn to play with your left foot, right? And so what his dad do, would sit in his wheelchair, he would hold him by the right side, and he would insist to play with the ball and learn how to play with his left foot, practice with the left. And lo and behold, fast forward 20 years, he gets back into the Celtic team because he can play with, well, definitely his right foot's stronger, you know. But he hits the referee in the face, that's a left foot cross, you know, and so he's obviously quite skillful, you know. So he learns lessons, he adapts, and that's how he kept his Celtic career going. So, and Davy Provan is very fulsome in his praise for Johnny. He said, look, I was taking this guy's job. He's a massive Celtic fan. Celtic fans could easily have turned on me for that, except, of course, Davy Provan was a brilliant winger. Celtic fans loved him. But Johnny Doyle became one of his closest friends at Celtic Park, you know. So that worked out really well. There was challenges further down the line, and he came back again. So it was really fascinating for me to find out all that.
Let's talk about some of those moments, some of those flashpoints of Johnny's career, good and bad. We'll start off with that sending off. Now that's one of the highlights of a game that will be watched forevermore, because it was absurd. He crosses the ball in, as you say, on his so-called weaker foot. It hits the ref, who's probably feeling a bit embarrassed, and he sends him off. And when I look back on that footage, he's raging. I mean, to such a point, I mean, he brushes past Jockstein on the way off the park, absolutely raging. What was Johnny's thoughts? I know the red card was eventually rescinded. What was Johnny's thoughts about that saga?
Actually, I don't think I found out much, Paul, about his views on that, because the fact it was rescinded pretty quickly, you know, reasonably quickly, I think that helped him get over it. But the season turned out to be a disaster. This was right at the start of the season. He'd come on as a sub, we were chasing it, we were 2-1 down and we were chasing it, but we had loads of pressure, so we'd won that corner, and then from the corner it gets fed back to Johnny, and he great hit with the left foot. Referee standing there, clean flush on the face, knocks him over. And I think you could see the players were kind of laughing at the referee, but the Ayr trainer had to come on and get the referee and make sure he was all right. And amazingly, he was quite although he's an older guy, he was quite an inexperienced referee. I think he'd only handled a few Premier League games. Produces the red card. And you're right, the funny thing about that incident is Jockstein stops him running off, and he says, what's happening? You know, he doesn't quite understand it. And I mean, Johnny almost pushes Jockstein out the way. He's so angry that he can't believe that what was a funny incident that's turned into this. But also, I presume he's thinking as well, are we going to get back into this game? Because it was the last 10 minutes, we didn't. So he gets sent off, we'll lose the momentum that we'd built up. Ayr win the game, Johnny gets the red card rescinded, we get nothing from the game. It's happened a few times since as well. But at least it gets taken off his record, you know. But the season goes from bad to worst to unbelievably bad. You know, we're flirting in the 9th position, 8th position in the league, and any time we turn a corner, we get run down again, you know. And then at the very end of that season, Celtic have 4 chances to claim a UEFA Cup spot against him. We lose every single. It's unbelievable. But of course, it was the loss of McGrain, Stanton. Nearly half the team were missing at various points during the season. Disastrous, you know. And the players that were brought in just weren't up to the same standard as well, you know. So that, to me, that incident is just totemic of how disastrous that season turned out for Celtic, you know. Johnny came up against the referee he booked him. He booked him in the following season as well, you know, and I think Johnny was just laughing about it by this point, you know. But obviously there were a number of referees down the years he'd built a bit of a relationship with, shall we say.
I bet he did. The thing is, a wee bit of humour would have just dealt with that situation, you know, but Scottish football has its quirks, Paul.
Yeah.
The other red card you were talking about is equally as infamous, but obviously what then ensued was far more beneficial to Celtic. It's one of the folkloric games. Books have been written about it. The 4-2 game. You don't even have to tell them anything else. If you say the 4-2 game, we're only talking about one game. That's a strange thing with Celtic. If I say to you the 6-2 game, you know which one I'm talking about, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So the 4-2 game, and you know, I listened to all the stories I've heard about Johnny, and I remember asking Danny McGrain, what were the players like with Johnny? He says, we were raging with him. And they go into the changing room and they go into the dressing room, and I think a few of them had day words, but he would have been beating himself up about that sending off though, Paul, wouldn't he?
Oh, apparently he was almost traumatised by it, because he then refuses to go out with the team when they go back on the pitch. I think what's happened is he's got so upset, and he himself says that afterwards he was sat in the changing room, he heard another goal, he wasn't sure. You know, he thinks his Celtic here is finished. He thinks he's cost Celtic the league. That one moment of madness in the last game of the season, down to 10 men, and that's it, it's over. So he's thinking, I'll be packing my bags after this. Billy McNeill shouted at him on the way off, you better hope, Doyle, we win this. So he knew, you know, it was absolutely disastrous for him. And I think so. Even though he doesn't see the goals, you know, he only hears, I think, one of the ground staff come in and tell him, hey, that's it, we've scored the game. But I think he's so sickened by what happened, you know, he's just like, he can't go over it. And he was in tears, because a few of the players talked about the fact he was in tears, and I think that was the relief coming out at that point, you know, because he himself seems saying, of all people, I've cost Celtic. I didn't get into this to cost my team a league title on the last day of the season against Rangers, you know, and he would have carried the blame for it. But fortunately, his teammates dug him out of that hole. One of my favourite Doyle stories is George McCluskey. I think Pat Bonner says it as well. Next day, the players are told to report in at Celtic Park. And when they do, the park in front of the main stand, they get out. John Doyle's waiting, signals him over, come here, goes into the car, says to George McCluskey, George, if you tell anybody I was crying last night, I'm going to batter you. And George's like, oh, come on, Johnny. George, I'm warning you, I'll batter you. He did it to all the other players. He was so embarrassed about the fact he'd been greeting, and he was more concerned about that, you know. But I found out that John Clark and Billy McNeill said later on, the players used to sing at him, 10 men won the league. At Johnny, you know, to wind him up, you know, because they knew how painful it was and that was them getting him back for the red card.
But then he's part of that story, isn't he?
Absolutely.
10 men won the league. You know, Johnny's as big a part of that. I think Stevie Murray calls him the pantomime villain in the piece, but it's all part of, you know, Celtic being not even more so the underdog, and we overcome that. And of course, he had great moments with Celtic, but another fantastic moment is when we beat this club, Real Madrid, at Celtic Park. I wouldn't normally have a Real Madrid pennant up there, but it's on there for a reason. When you think about that tie, that result at Celtic Park against that side, and the fact that Johnny scored that goal, the celebration, incredible, isn't it?
You know, knowing as much as I know now about the guy, I'm so pleased for him. You know, to have that absolute highlight moment, not just of a Celtic career, but one of the greatest moments in Celtic history, to beat Real Madrid at home, beat them convincingly as well, and he gets the second goal. Alan Snedden put in a couple of amazing crosses that night, you know, but he was two large defenders, two tall defenders, and Johnny's only 5'7", you know, everybody calls him Wee Doyley, and he just decides, I'm just going to go for it, there's nothing to lose here, you know. Sabido and Camacho just goes right through the middle, he sees the keeper, decides not to come, that's it, I'm going for it, and he outjumps both of them. Unbelievable. There was a wee story of a fan who shouted out something, you know, language we couldn't use, but he couldn't believe that he was trying it. He shouted, you know, and then lo and behold, he gets it and he planks it right in the net. Unbelievable. And even, of course, after that first leg, he's getting interviewed all the time. You know, they're turning up. The players are winding him up about him winning the Player of the Month award. They're all phoning him up, pretending to be Billy McNeil to tell him the news, all this stuff, you know. And he's taped the game. He's got a video recorder. He's taped the game. He's always watching the game and the highlights as well. But I was always interested in the second leg. There's a part of me which there's something wrong. You know, I'm always interested in. I think the Celtic story is unique because we've got such great history. There's a lot of tragedy and a lot of negative points in there as well. You know, we've had some real disappointments. Yeah. Even in our lifetime, we've had some real disappointments. So with Celtic, it's really the rough as well as the smooth. And that second leg in Madrid is quite a story, you know, because a lot of folk talk about George McCluskey's chance, which unfortunately he missed, but we actually had a couple of other really good chances in the first 10 minutes. They had like 3 yellow card challenges in the first 2 minutes. Johnny Doyle was cleaned out right away. Bobby Lennox was cleaned out. It was unbelievable. So right away you're thinking the referee's not got control of this, but Celtic keep with it right up until half time. The whole game is, you can watch it live, so you can watch it in colour on YouTube. Some Real Madrid or TV stations put it up there. Fascinating. And even when they get the 2 goals, it's not over. We almost score a couple more times again. You just think, so close, you know. And that would have been unbelievable. To have knocked Real Madrid out the competition and to have got a result in the Bernabeu would have been amazing. So I heard from some Celtic fans who made the trip, because that often gets forgotten about as well. 2,000 Celtic fans went to Spain for that game. Yeah. Incredible. And a lot of them said, you know, part of me was thinking, kind of glad we didn't win, because we wouldn't have made it out alive. I just think because it was, Real Madrid fans were not used to losing, you know, and they weren't expecting such a, even though they were 2-0 up, they were fully expecting to beat us again, you know. So they weren't expecting to be quite so tough. So finding that part of the story out as well was fascinating.
I always look at that fixture as well, Paul, because we then went through a period of time where we were nowhere near a European level. A lot of Celtic fans now, I mean, on this very day, we've just been looking at the group stage draw for the Europa League.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever an expectancy, you never take anything for granted, but that's where we want our club to be. We're in the group stages of a European competition. There was many years where we were nowhere. You know, growing up, it was first round, second round in Europe, and then bounced out the competition. You got 2 or 4 European games a season. And that was the last great kind of run, you know, against Real Madrid coming to an end. One of the things that comes through clear in the book is Johnny's relationship with the Celtic fans. Now, it's because he's a Celtic fan himself, and you know, going to the supporters club dances and all that kind of stuff, sometimes uninvited, you know, just going with other players. He enjoyed it so much. Talk to us about that unique relationship, and obviously the sadness actually in the opening of the book that the last photograph took place, and it was in Trinent, wasn't it? At a supporters club dance.
Yeah,
Tommy Burns.
That's right. And that came about because for a number of years after we did the booklet about Johnny, we decided we set up a website, johndoyle.com. Brendan, myself, Joanna, we ran that for a few years, and then we just ran with a Facebook page, and over time people were putting up so many great wee stories about him and photos, and that one stood out. And it's a fan from Haddington, Zeke Ingle is his name, and that was his local supporters club, you know. So he went along that night. Zeke's got some great stories about Johnny. That night Zeke won a competition of some sort on the night, like a raffle or something, you know. Said to go up on the stage, and Johnny was dishing out the prizes, and he heard the name. He thought, that's a bit of an unusual name you've got there. So he tried to give him what Johnny Doyle described as a Masonic handshake with his arm through his leg. saying nice to meet you, you know. It's like, but Zeke also said earlier that season or the season after, they were travelling back from Hampden, him and his pals, in a car at this time after a cup final, and Johnny Doyle overtook them in his green Audi, and they couldn't believe it. So they're beating their horn. So what does Johnny do? Comes back on the brakes, gets the windows down, starts talking to them for a wee while on the motorway, you know. Right. Unbelievable. So he'd already had a wee connection. But Zeke had mentioned when he put that Facebook post up saying the date, you know, and I'm thinking that the 17th of October 81, that's only 2 days before Johnny dies. So I thought, for me, this is so symbolic of the man. That last weekend, he gives it up to go through with Tommy Burns, Bobby Lennox, to a supporters event in East of Scotland, and Zeke's pal took a camera along, got a photo of Zeke with Tommy and Johnny, and himself with Tommy and Johnny as well, and I got in touch with Zeke, and he asked if we could use it, and then he told me the other stories as well, got them in too. It was just pure luck. But there are so many Celtic people who have stories like this. It's incredible. After the book came out, I put it up on my own Facebook page, you know, and John, who's a year below me at school through in Glenorths and Fife, John was posting, and I remember we used to go to the same bus stop, you know, so I knew John reasonably well. His dad had run the Celtic Supporters Club, the Johnny Thompson bus, before I moved to Fife. Right. Big Celtic family, and John was posting about how he went through with his dad on his birthday, Celtic Park. Johnny Doyle was injured. Johnny Doyle got them in the back of the stand. He stopped every single player, every single first team player, and forced them to sign John's book that day. And then he met him at a Player of the Year dance the year after as well. So, as Davy Provan says, Johnny Doyle was out there every single weekend, and that's backed up, you know. And it all comes because Johnny's family. Johnny's dad was a massive Celtic fan. The Doyle family's prized heirloom was this Celtic plaque that his father had from when he was a wee boy, kept all his days, and then gave it to Johnny as well, you know. When his father was in hospital, his dad was in hospital for a year after breaking his back in a mining accident. He then died 3 or 4 years after that. The family took tremendous succour from the fact that Bobby Evans, the Celtic captain, who happened to be Johnny Doyle's dad's hero, came to see him in hospital.
Incredible.
So when Roger Bailey does a big interview with Johnny for playing for Celtic 1980, so this is just a year before he dies, at the end Roger says Johnny Doyle doesn't talk about it, but he's very well known for hospital visits. A lot of footballers are, but he doesn't like the publicity. But Roger put this in at the end to say, and linked it in with the dad, and the fact that Johnny often talked about Bobby Evans' visit to his father, and that really helped the family, you know, through a very difficult time. So he appreciated it, but he also appreciated what it was like for sports just to spend time with Celtic players, you know. And so he would regularly. There was a lovely fan from Antrim got in touch with me. He used to come to the games in the late 70s with his mum. She would bring him over. The father was working, you know. They would always stay after the game, main stand, because they would get to speak to Johnny. Johnny would spend time. He'd come out, he'd give them his shorts from the game. Neil Walken would be raging here. He's stolen the shorts, he's giving them away as gifts, you know. And again, that personal connection, just because he took the time to do that. Yeah. And I'm not being overly critical of other players, you know. You either do it or you don't, you know what I mean. And obviously Tommy Burns, you know, he and Tommy obviously rubbed off each other particularly well, and Tommy's known for doing a lot of the same things. So to an extent, I think there's a reason for that. And these people were lucky, you know. If you get Celtic players playing for you, Celtic sports playing for you, it means so much more, and it's great.
Absolutely. You've mentioned Tommy a few times, and we've got to speak about Tommy. Any excuse to talk about Tommy Burns. But again, a lot of stories come out after the event, because these guys, they don't broadcast it. Yep. They're doing it because they want to do it, and it's the right thing in their minds to do it. Tommy Burns used to pay those visits as well. I've heard loads of stories about Tommy, but they were great friends to such a degree that Tommy is Joanna Doyle's godfather.
That's right.
Talk to us about that unique relationship between Tommy and Doyle, because I mean, when Johnny Doyle signs for Celtic, Burns has been there as part of the ground staff. You know, he's making the breakthrough, and Johnny comes a wee bit older than Tommy. Yeah,
there's actually quite an age gap, probably 5 or 6 years between the two of them. So in a footballing team sense, you're a wee bit surprised, you know. So what's the connection here? The connection's Celtic, you know. As soon as anybody joins Celtic after that, Johnny Doyle goes up and first question, who do you support? He wants to know right away, you know. And if you're a Celtic supporter, if you're a Catholic, the following Monday's into the reserve changing room saying, right, did you go to Mass yesterday or not? He wants to know you're a Rangers fan, he gets them singing the Celtic song on the first day, you know, this kind of stuff. Him and Tommy, when Tommy makes his debut, running out of Celtic Park, John Doyle right in front of him. You know, so I think it's the Celtic thing. You know, it's the fact that they've got this connection, as George McCluskey says. You know, massive Celtic fans. You know, if you come from a Celtic family like George as well, there's big expectations. You know, everybody in your community knows you and they're right behind you, but big pressure there as well. You've got to learn to handle it. But Tommy and Johnny loved Celtic. They had the connection through their faith as well, which has become a bit more apparent over time too. And they just fell into it right away, you know. So they were hanging out from pretty early on. Anne Marie tells the story. She comes back from living in Germany after she gets married, 4 or 5 years, back to View Park. After she's been there a few weeks and they're talking to some of their new neighbours, one of them says, did we see Johnny Doyle at your house the other week there? And her and her husband Frank saying, nice, that's her brother. Tommy Burns there? Yeah, they were out playing football in our back garden. They just all the time, you know. And a Celtic fan from Coatbridge got in touch. His youth club player of the year presentation rather, there was Johnny and Tommy. They came along. At the end, they're helping the old women brush up the hall. There's photos of that as well. They just spent the whole evening there. It wasn't a quick in and out, you know. They just enjoyed it, and being able to do it together was obviously just much more fun, you know. But then I find out one of Johnny's good pals from Kilmarnock is Hugh McIntosh, who's a Rangers fan. They just fit in together. Johnny takes Hugh to a lot of these Celtic nights as well. Hugh is good pals with Tommy Burns. Hugh's got good stories about Tommy, the two of them slagging each other off for their teams the way that we would as fans, you know. Incredible. But yeah, I love the fact in Tommy's biography, he talks at good length about Johnny, which you would expect, you know. But he also says, like, when Tommy Burns gets sent off at Pittodrie, he's furious. He's taking his Celtic jersey off, 2 arms around him straight away. No, you can't do that. You can't do that in front of our fans. Calms him down, gets him off. And Tommy was known as a hothead, like Johnny was in the early days as well. But in the latter years, Tommy was able to handle that much better. Johnny Doyle helped him get there, you know. A great story of how the two of them, a fierce argument on the pitch at Celtic Park after they lose a goal. And Tommy Burns says, we're almost coming to blows, but the Celtic players have started the game really quickly. They're up the park, win a corner, Tommy takes the corner, Johnny scores. And in Tommy's words, that was us back in love again.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is. I mentioned earlier about the wee black book, and obviously there was an incident when Andy Lynch and Johnny Doyle, apparently, you know, they came to blows a few times, but Johnny gets sent off. When he signs for Celtic, Andy Lynch is sitting there in the dressing room and asking the question, is my name still in that wee black book of yours? And he produces the book and rubs it out or scores it out. No, Andy, you're all right now. So I loved that as well. But you get tales from every player that played with Johnny.
Yeah.
And the other one I remember is when he's in the reserve team, and obviously the corresponding fixtures were at whatever ground, so the Celtic Park or Ibrox, and the supporters bus comes up and Johnny produces the crucifix at the window. That's all chaos ensued.
Comes from Willie Garner.
Yeah.
He says to Willie Garner, do you want to see what 30 bare arses look like? Because as soon as the Rangers fans see it's him and he's flashing his crucifix, they all drop their trousers in the window. Willie Garner said, what is this?
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. By the time the terrible event happens, Johnny's fallen out of favour with Billy McNeil.
Yeah.
How do you think now? There's a transfer request.
Oh, yeah.
You know, after signing for the team of your dreams, if you like, Johnny is a wee bit disillusioned by that stage. How do you think that would have affected him, Paul?
Oh, must have been bad. You know, it must have been bad. But what I was very pleased to find out and to realise was he didn't give in. He didn't throw in the towel. So the problem for Johnny was Celtic had signed Frank McGarvey, new striker, new record signing as well. We didn't win the league when Frank joined us because he only joined in March, you know, so that was unfortunate. We missed the goals. The next season, Charlie Nicholas is breaking through, right? So there's one season, Johnny's top scorer at Celtic with George 12 goals each, although Johnny says one of George's doesn't count because it was a friendly, it was a drive or a cup game or something, So top scorers, when McGarvey and Nicholas are in harness, they score. I think one of them scores 29, the other one 27. What a transformation. That's how we overcome Aberdeen, win the league that season, So Johnny's out of favour because we've got a much stronger front line than we had, and Davy Provan is the first choice winger, But he didn't help himself because in a pre-season, they were over for a tournament in New York. He gave a press interview. He made it clear he was unhappy and he was looking to speak to Billy McNeill. Billy McNeill wasn't with them. John Clark was in charge of that. Then they fly over to the Feyenoord tournament, and the two of them, him and Billy McNeill, have it out. Now, what we know about Billy and what we know about Johnny, nobody's backing down from this. And it leads to the ridiculous situation where Johnny puts in a transfer request. And immediately he's saying to everybody, I didn't want to do it. But he's done it, and Celtic accept it and put him on the transfer list. Because they're saying, you shouldn't have done that, and we're not happy with you. But the good thing is, that's him in the reserves. Bobby Lennox, by this point, is in charge of the reserve team. And he's playing every week in the reserves. And he's still going at it. He doesn't lose heart. And interestingly, he still keeps going to the supporters' functions. You see, he's still out there every week. So he's trying to get back in Billy McNeill's good books, Davy Provan gets injured early October. And his wife said that, Johnny's wife said this subsequently, he thought this might be my way back in, with Davy being injured, if I can just persuade the manager, that'll be me back in the team again. He'd done it. He'd been in worse situations at Celtic before and he'd got back in, So he was committed to doing that. The 5 days before he dies, Queen's Park, Glasgow Cup, scores again. He'd already got the goals that won us the Reserve League Championship against Dundee United. He'd scored quite a few goals in the reserves. Bobby Lennox talks about the fact him and Peter Latchford were leading these boys, were giving them good qualities. So he was still doing a job for Celtic, even in the reserves, but he was still waiting for that opportunity to get back into the first team, It never came because he passed away first, unfortunately.
I mean, that tragedy, again, I've spoken to some players who received the call, and it was various players were called by Brian Scott, for example, to break the news. And it's that tragedy that you were talking about. You look at our history, but it is tinged with moments like that. And I often wonder, how on earth can a player go to his work the next day, go and play a game of football the following week? I mean, not only are you losing a player and a friend, it's the personality, it's the energy that you've got there, the influence that you've got there. An incredible sadness befell Celtic Park. And I think in many ways it's still felt, because we talk about Johnny Doyle, we talk about Johnny Thompson, guys who lost their lives while still Celtic players. There's been others, obviously, like Tommy Burns, who was still at Celtic when he passed away. Neely Mockin, of course, who was still at Celtic when he passed away. But the tragic element of that, I mean, it's so sad. And when you look at when it happened, 40 years ago now, it's fitting that this book is coming out to celebrate his legacy. What do you think his legacy is at Celtic?
I think it's almost a classic tale of a Celtic fan making it good, being able to live the dream, our dream, but also, importantly, his father's dream, his Aunt Teresa's dream, his uncle. So his aunt and uncle started taking him to the Celtic games after his father passed away, It's so important for them. But when you speak to Anne-Marie's sister, when you speak to Jason, when you speak to Joanna, there's no sadness, they love telling the stories, they love hearing stories. Nothing better than fans telling them stuff about their dad and their brother they hadn't heard before, and it keeps his memory alive, obviously, but it's a positive thing, so for me, the legacy really lies in the connection with the support, and the fact that's why we still talk about Johnny Doyle today, because people still cherish the memories of him, meeting him, the stories about him, because he was a genuine character. Tommy Burns would say, he did, some things he shouldn't have done. The crucifix was coming out all the time. Ayr United beat Rangers league-winning Rangers. They beat them 3-0 down at Somerset Park. Incredible result. Johnny has a hand in 2 of the goals. One of them, third goal goes in, he runs all the way along the terrace in front of the Rangers fans with his crucifix out. Joe Felipe shouts at him, stop it, they're going to come over the wall and get you. He shouts back, let them come. I don't care, you know. The crucifix, like you say, there's photos when we were in the league at Easter Road 77. It's out there, it's on the jersey. Then he used to have it taped up. The referees would say to him, Mr. Doyle, you can't play with that. He'd say, what, you tell me I can't practice my faith? And then they had this, he would put a huge cross over the crucifix with plasters instead. He was always winding them up. Just incredible. To me, I decided, you know, actually we can't make this a sad book. Right, because there's a terrible double tragedy. You know, in many respects, the real heroine of the Johnny Doyle story is his mother and his sister, because, you know, his mum loses her husband very early on. He's left with 2 young children. You know, they grew up. One of them ends up becoming a Celtic player. Incredible. Anne-Marie says every game when Johnny was still living at home, the mother would clean his boots, not him. It was always the mother that would do it. You know, and then she loses him as well. But I thought, no, it's a tragic story, but tragedy doesn't sum up Johnny Doyle well. This is a guy who was larger than life, you know. So that's why I ended up changing at the very end. I changed the title of the book. I was going to call it True Celt, which was a quote from Billy McNeil about right at the end, you know, and I thought that's great. But then I thought, you know, everybody all the way through as a youngster, you know, when he's telling his sister, you get in, you're not allowed to walk around the streets with a Rangers fan as a boyfriend, right? Everybody, Johnny was Celtic daft. That's what they always say, Celtic daft. As a player, he was even more Celtic daft, you know. And a couple of the players are suggesting, you know, with the 4-2 incident as well, maybe that didn't always help him. You know, maybe it mattered almost too much from the perspective of a professional footballer, but that was him. Heart on the sleeve, you know, hated losing, hated Celtic being put down in any sense. So that's why he gets... he sees a comment from a fan after a Celtic Rangers game in the Sunday Mail. Negative comment about how he kicked the ball. He wouldn't give it back to Rangers, but kicked the ball away. He wrote a 3-page letter to that fan.
I saw that.
One of his,
in green ink.
Yeah, one of his daughters sent it to Matt McGlone a couple of years ago. Matt put it up on the social media in green. It's lovely handwriting, 3-page letter. Beautiful letter, basically saying to this supporter, I'm only writing to you because you're a Celtic fan. But you need to understand what we're up against here, you know. It's hard enough to win games against Rangers without giving them every wee advantage going, you know. So I'm not going to do that. But then goes into detail about the difficulties, the pressure, you know, and how you shouldn't let the media divide you. You know, you shouldn't be saying stuff like this in the papers about us who are out there trying to win stuff for the club. That's our common purpose. Brilliant. It's almost like a Celtic manifesto. But yet, the popular view of Johnny is, oh, Johnny Doyle's not like that. Johnny's a head case, you know. Absolutely not. He would have difficulty controlling his emotions at times, but he was an articulate, clever guy as well. So telling that full story was really important to me, you know. And yeah, so I changed it to Celtic Daft because I thought it's just a wee bit less serious, and I think it captures a wee bit more of Johnny's spirit as well.
Definitely. I think it was Pat Stanton that says to me, Johnny, Celtic Daft, and he spoke, even in the modern game, top clubs need a couple of players who are Celtic daft, or, you know, and he started speaking about how, you know, when it becomes a point where the chips are down, yeah, you've got professional pride regardless of who you play for, he says, but these guys, these have got a wee bit extra because it means so much to them. One thing, I followed the site for a long time. It was very interesting to see him in a picture with Status Quo and various others. But one of the stories I followed with interest, and it had a happy ending, was the fact that Joanna hadn't heard her late father's voice.
Yeah.
And then you're thinking, well, there must be loads of taped interviews and video footage, but as we know, it didn't really happen back then after games. Yeah, there are some interviews, but they finally found an interview with Johnny, didn't they? Yeah,
and it was a Celtic fan who made the connection. It was unbelievable. So Jana would have been, I think, 2.5, 3 years old when her dad died, you know, so that was why, you know, there wasn't anything that she could remember, obviously too young. And Celtic fans started looking, the club started looking, made contact with the media companies. I know that Tony Hamilton tried as well, you know, to see, surely there must be some footage of Johnny being interviewed somewhere. That was about 5-6 years ago. Nothing came up, you know. And then RTE, the Irish state broadcaster, it turns out they'd had a kind of football programme. They'd sent a camera crew across with a female journalist. So they took in a Celtic Morton game, which was quite controversial, but great footage of the crowd coming in during the game. And then interview Billy McNeil in his office. You can see him, actually, at one point he walks down the tunnel with Johnny Doyle. They're talking as they walk around the park, and then they go down the tunnel together. But she interviews Bobby Lennox. And you see Bobby's thinking a couple of questions, doesn't he really quite, don't know if she gets it or not, but he's given a straight answer anyway. And then somebody says something at the side that makes Bobby just we crease of a smile, and he said, next thing, camera moves, Tommy Burns, in front of the Rangers end at Celtic Park with their jerseys and just getting interviewed. And so again, Tommy, and again, you hear something at the side, think, is that, And lo and behold, he's making jokes. Johnny Doyle's making jokes about Bobby Lennox retiring and stuff like this, right? That's what it is. So Tommy ends up bursting out a wee bit of laughter, right? Next thing, there he is with his curly perm, Johnny Doyle. And the woman asks him, so John, tell us, what's it like, the training at Celtic Park? And right, just a con, just for the manager's ego. We don't really train here at all. And the other two of them burst out laughing. And that's it. And I thought, that's amazing. So RTE had put it on social media that morning. A Celtic fan had seen it, and he'd sent me a message to say, I think Johnny Doyle interviewed, is the daughter no looking? It's like, unbelievable. Wow. And then so I was lucky because I was able to send her a link to it and get her feedback by messages. She was quite overcome, as you can imagine. Just a short wee interview, only lasted a few seconds, but that was it. Brilliant, and I loved it because it summed him up so well, because again, the book, but all the stories you've heard about in the years, this guy's a character, he's a funny guy, he's always looking for the funny side of things, and lo and behold, even in a serious interview, he just goes for
he's on the wind up.
Absolutely.
It's just incredible. I know that social media gets a hard rap at times, but it can be used for the greater good.
Absolutely.
Imagine, Paul, being in that scenario where 35 years or however long later you finally hear your father's voice. Incredible story. Tell us where we can find your book. How can we get our hands on this? It's a cracker.
It's through the website, theshamrock.net. It's also on sale at Carlton Books, and hopefully get confirmation later today, hopefully in the Celtic stores in the next couple of weeks as well. Fingers crossed.
Where can we find you on social media, Paul?
It's theshamrock.net.
Brilliant. Paul McQuade, thanks for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul.